Stop scrolling because this is one of those policy contradictions that sounds like a meme until you realize it's real. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The United States is now treating Bitcoin like a strategic reserve asset. Not as a tech experiment, not as a campaign talking point, but as a store of national value with do not sell language attached to it. And at the same time, the US government has formally recognized silver as a critical mineral tied to national security and industrial survival, yet holds effectively zero strategic silver reserves. Read that again and let your brain fight it for a second. Roughly $29 billion in a digital asset. And nothing meaningful in the metal that sits inside solar panels, missiles, medical systems, and the hardware of the modern economy. One is 15 years old and purely informational. The other is a 5,000-year element with physical utility so unique that modern technology literally collapses without it. If that sounds irrational, good, because you're thinking clearly. Now let's build the case like investigators, not cheerleaders. In March 2025, the White House publicly announced an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a U.S. digital asset stockpile, framing it as a move to position America as the crypto capital of the world. The logic was simple. Treat Bitcoin as digital gold, lean into its fixed supply narrative, and formalize what the government already held through forfeitures. That's the key detail most people miss. This wasn't initially about Congress quietly appropriating billions to buy Bitcoin on the open market. It was about converting seized assets, taken from criminal and civil cases, into an official reserve posture. A policy becomes real the moment it's institutionalized, and this one was. The message was unmistakable. The US wants to be early, wants to be loud, and wants to treat digital scarcity like national strategy. Fine. But that's where the paradox begins, because the exact same government within the same modern timeline acknowledged that silver is critical, vulnerable, and essential, and then chose not to hold it. Here's the uncomfortable part. The Bitcoin reserve story is clean, easy, and politically elegant. It has a futuristic ring to it. It signals innovation. It costs less political capital because it can be framed as, why we're just holding what we seized. And because it's digital, it doesn't force the public to picture warehouses, audits, supply chains, and the messy physical reality of industrial dependency. That's why it moved fast. Estimates tied to government-linked wallets put U.S. Bitcoin holdings around the tens of billions as of January 2026, and the executive order framework openly encourages budget-neutral strategies to acquire more. In other words, don't call it taxpayer spending, call it clever accounting, call it strategic positioning. But strategy isn't supposed to be aesthetics. Strategy is supposed to be survival. If you want this channel to keep doing the work most people want to, connecting policy decisions to real-world supply chains, hit and subscribe right now because it tells the algorithm this kind of investigation matters. And while you're here, drop a comment that says John A.J. so I know you're locked in, because the next step is where the story turns from ironic to dangerous. In November 2025, the U.S. Geological Survey finalized a new critical minerals list that, for the first time, included silver. That designation isn't a compliment. It's a warning label. Critical means essential to economic or national security, vulnerable to disruption, and difficult to replace, and silver qualifies in the most brutal way possible. It's not just valuable, it's functional. It is the most electrically conductive metal on Earth, and the modern world runs on conductivity, reliability, and miniaturized power. Silver isn't nice to have. Silver is embedded. Solar photovoltaic cells require silver paste because performance matters and substitutes done T match the same conductivity at scale. Electric vehicles require more silver than internal combustion cars because the entire system is electronics heavy, power managed, sensor rich, and increasingly grid connected. Semiconductors, data centers, advanced communications, satellite systems, precision guided weapons. These are not luxury products. These are the backbone of both the civilian economy and the defense state. In medical technology, silver's antibacterial properties aren't a myth or a marketing slogan. They are a real reason it's used in instruments, wound care, and specialized applications. When a government declares silver critical, it is admitting something out loud. And without this metal, the next decade of industrial policy fails. Now stack that admission against the supply chain reality. The U.S. still imports a large share of its silver needs. Domestic output exists, but it's not the whole story, and global production is concentrated in places that can become choke points. This is why critical mineral I status matters. It turns a commodity into a national security dependency. Yet publicly available indicators suggest the U.S. does not maintain a meaningful strategic silver stockpile today. Historically, America did hold large silver reserves through the mid-20th century defense stockpile era. But over time, those holdings were liquidated. The result is an exposed posture. a nation that acknowledges silver as essential, while effectively outsourcing its availability to the global market at the exact moment that global demand is becoming structural, not cyclical. This is where the market stops being a chart and starts being a pressure system. When silver demand runs hotter than supply for multiple consecutive years, inventories don't just decline, they get consumed, dispersed, and lost in the literal sense, because much silver is used in tiny amounts across billions of products, and recycling is economically limited. When silver goes into electronics, it doesn't come back like a gold bar that can be melted and recast. It becomes a scattered resource. That matters because it creates a ratchet effect. Industrial demand can tighten supply even during downturns. And when a shock hits, geopolitical disruption, export restrictions, refinery constraints, defense ramp-ups, there's less buffer than the average investor assumes. So when you see silver trading around triple digits in early 2026, don't reduce it to hype. Price is often the shadow cast by scarcity. Here is my question for you, and I want you to answer it in the comments because it reveals how you think about power. If a government officially labels a material critical to national security but refuses to stockpile it, what does that tell you about how decisions are really made? Strategy, optics, or inertia? Because that question leads to the next one. Who fills the vacuum when the state hesitates? Markets hate emptiness. A policy vacuum gets filled by industrial buyers securing multi-year contracts, by sovereign funds buying quietly, by refineries prioritizing domestic demand, by nations that understand supply chains or leverage. And once those players move, you don't get the medal back by issuing a press release. Now bring it back to the title's uncomfortable contrast. Bitcoin has a story: capped supply, censorship resistance, a hedge against currency debasement. That story has power, and I'm not here to deny it. But Bitcoin cannot conduct electricity. It cannot stabilize a grid. It cannot be embedded into a missile guidance system. It cannot be soldered into a semiconductor line. It is a financial asset whose usefulness depends on networks, electricity, and access. Silver is a physical input whose usefulness remains even when systems fail. So if the US embraces Bitcoin as a reserve narrative while admitting silver is critical yet leaving strategic reserves empty, the signal to the world is not subtle. It tells rivals and partners alike that America is willing to brand the future without fully securing the materials that physically build it. And that's why this isn't a trivia paradox. It's a blueprint for future stress. If the US ever decides to reverse course and build a strategic silver stockpile after publicly labeling silver critical, it won't be buying into a calm, surplus market. It will be buying into a tightened system where industrial demand is persistent, inventories are thinner, and other nations have been accumulating while the West debated. That's when the price doesn't move like an investment. It moves like a scramble. So the real takeaway isn't Bitcoin bad, silver good. The real takeaway is that governments reveal their priorities through what they formalize, what they ignore, and what they delay. Today, America has formalized the digital reserve story. But by declaring silver critical while holding no meaningful strategic silver reserve, it has also, accidentally, broadcast one of the most bullish signals possible to everyone watching supply chains like a battlefield. The paradox is the tell. The tell becomes the trade, and the trade becomes the repricing.